Hi everyone, welcome. I've got a stack of cardboard here. It's stuff that I was trying to tear it to size that would fit into my shredder easily so I could just start feeding it in so that the next time I get around to creating fresh bedding for my worm bins, I'll have cardboard that's all set to go. And when I saw this stack of cardboard, it reminded me almost of this bin right here, because this bin and this stack of cardboard have something in common. The fact is that this here is my 78-day African nightcrawler bin, which over the past 7 feedings has been set up in the so-called lasagna style feeding. And if you know what lasagna is, it's an Italian dish where you've got layers of flat pasta, in between which you've got cheese and tomato sauce and stuff like that. So people have adopted the concept of creating a so-called lasagna bin or lasagna style feeding within their worm bin. That's what's been going on here in this bin over here for, I don't know the length of time at this point, but I can say it was the last 7 feedings. So on 7 occasions prior, we've come in here and stacked up their food, combined with the cardboard, and tried to do it in a way that would kind of resemble a neatly stacked sequence of layers of lasagna. So the last time we checked in here to feed was 10 days ago. And at that time I had a whole bunch of berries that had been frozen, and they just were getting very old, and I didn't really want to keep them around anymore for human consumption. I figured I would feed them to the worms, and that's what these guys got last time. It wasn't all that much, and I would assume that after 10 days a whole bunch of berries would probably be gone by now. But I don't know. You never know. I can't remember much else about that last feeding from 10 days ago. But I do recall us placing a new top layer of cardboard onto the very tippy top of the stack of where the lasagna layers had been placed. So now, after all this time pulling all these little worms off this piece of paper, I just hope I didn't miss any. I probably did. So I'm just going to set this aside. Hopefully if there are any on here, they'll stay put. This piece of cardboard looks kind of interesting with this little bits of mold growing on there. No worms hanging out on it. There's a good bit of moisture all over the place. That plastic covering that was over the top of everything in here was really keeping the moisture in here nicely. Right out to the very edges even. So I guess I did a good job pressing that plastic up against the walls of the bin. I guess over here, this is the only spot where it looks like the material could maybe use a little bit of moisture. It's a little bit dry right here, but it amounts to virtually nothing. So that's a good sign. That means this bin's got a good amount of moisture in it everywhere, giving the worms pretty much no excuse to not be breaking the stuff in here down. Everything's all nice and damp the way they like it. So I'm going to start unstacking this lasagna layer setup. You could see this piece of newspaper was also new last time. I guess we were probably starting to run pretty low on. Woohoo! I think we were probably starting to run pretty low on stuff to give these guys. So it looks like some of these berries are still here. After I fed them last time, it occurred to me that maybe I should have started like squishing some of these berries, because maybe not all of them have had their skin punctured. But I think these, yeah, these are blueberries, so I think one way or another they've been able to get into these things pretty effortlessly. I doubt we're going to find one that's not yet been breached. Well, maybe I'm wrong. There might still be. And they're really liking that, right? So maybe we'll get a similar reveal at another layer. But I guess we have to disrupt these little guys and get them out of our way so we can proceed downwards through the stack. I don't want to make a federal case out of inspecting this feeding area. Ooh, look at that. Okay, guys. Excuse me. I thought there'd be holes that these guys can just punch down through and get down out of the bright lights, but it looks like they just decided to huddle up with one another instead. Let's see if we can remove this piece of paper here without destroying it. If we can, then maybe we can reuse it as a lasagna layer for the reconstruction of this thing. Now, the one thing that I felt like I've been getting robbed of lately is a good inspection of the system's outer edges, because every time we would come in here, we would focus on carefully disassembling this lasagna layer set up and then reconstructing it as carefully. And that would take up a fair bit of time, and by the time we got finished reconstructing the feeding area with the newly rebuilt lasagna layers, it would only be at that time that it would occur to me that I'd like to give the bin's outer edges a little bit of an inspection, see how things look. But at that point it seemed like it would be much too disruptive of a thing to do, so we would always just skip it. But I decided this time I'm going to make that mission number one before we mess around with replenishing food down in this lasagna layered feeding bin. We're going to do a quick scan of the outer edges of the system, and then we'll do our best to sort of rebuild this thing. But I'm starting to wonder if it might be time to retire the lasagna layer feeding approach in this bin after, well, we've already decided that we are going to do it today, but this might be the last time. And after eight times, it's been fun, but it is a little bit time consuming, and I just can't seem to help myself from getting wrapped up in trying to do it just so. And while it was fun, it's something I don't want to just sort of bake into my everyday maintenance of my bins, that's for sure. Not that you couldn't do it, because it does seem to provide the worms with spaces that they really enjoy being in. I guess they like that sense that they're sort of squished in between some stuff or whatever. So so you might want to do it just for the sake of giving your worms that little extra sort of life experience. Instead of just living in a bunch of shredded paper, they've got things that they can crawl around in between and on top of and underneath and everything else. So I think we've we've succeeded in locating a good number of large materials here, like pieces of paper and cardboard, and I've been sort of putting them together here in a pile. I don't know if any of them resemble a flat layered piece of noodle that could be used as a lasagna layer per se, but maybe we can sort of cobble together a few of them at a time to create a layer or two. Put this thing back together. Maybe we could replace that top layer cardboard with a nice fresh piece, and then take that one that had been sitting out here as the top covering and put it to better use somewhere down in the middle of the feeding area where it'll get a little bit more attention. Probably break down a little bit better. It's like a big wad of I don't know, my bedding used to do this before I started incorporating a lot of little flakes of leaves to prevent the pieces of paper from clumping together this way. But every now and then I bump into some of it that's still sort of sitting as a clump somewhere in one of my bins. I feel compelled to try to loosen it up and break it up. So this big stack of stuff we're planning to recycle is sort of preventing us from really getting a good look at that far edge. So why don't we begin our inspection of the edges over on this other opposite side, and then we can move all that stuff to be recycled over. Give us a peek at what's over there too. We got a pretty good amount of recycled chunks of large paper and cardboard bits. I think we started out with like 4 or 5 layers, and then every now and then we would just come in with another coffee filter or another piece of fresh replacement cardboard or whatever the case may be, and we've added layers, replaced really beaten up layers, and all these little chunks are parts of the what had previously been layers of this lasagna feeding. Alright, really quick look. Let's check it out so we can cut to the chase and get this thing fed and back up on the shelf and let it continue. Things are really nice with all this moisture all the way out to the edges and all the way, well, I guess with that one section was a little bit dry, but only at the very tippy top. I guess we can probably just check right there first, and you could see right below that little patch that was a little bit dry on top, there's still worms hanging out right below it, unfazed by the little bit of dryness right above them. So we got pretty lucky on giving this system a good covering last time when we pressed that piece of plastic bag up against the walls of the container and tried our best to lock in the system's moisture. Alright, we are pretty much giving this whole bin like an upturning at this point, obviously. But all this stuff that's out on this edge over here, this stuff's been untouched for weeks and weeks at this point. So I'm sure that this little bit of aeration is not going to hurt In fact, I think it's probably going to help. Also sort of dislodging some of this stuff that was starting to not really get hard or anything like that, because you could see it all flakes apart quite readily. So there wasn't anything wrong with it per se, but it just seems to me like if the material's a little bit looser, it would, permit perhaps more or faster worm movement or something like that. I don't know. It just seems like it's less of an impedance if it's not really dense and thick stuff that the worms have to power through. If they could just sort of scoot right through it, 1, 2, 3, they can save their energy for eating instead of burrowing. All right, that side looked really, really good. I like what's going on in this bin. This is such a fun bin to check in on. Not only the lasagna layers, but just the general, well-being, I guess. I don't know. It seems like a good, hardy system with a good number of worms, very capable in terms of being able to break down good amounts of food. We've, I guess that last feeding of berries wasn't so impressive, and there was stuff that was going to get eaten pretty quickly, and there's even some leftovers, if you think about it. Maybe these African nightcrawlers are really more into the carbon-based bedding type materials, because these are known for really enjoying their carbon food sources, perhaps even favoring it over the typical nitrogen-rich kitchen scraps, vegetables and fruits and things like that. I gotta say, other than those little bits of berry that we saw scattered here and there, I don't think we ran into any other types of leftovers, not even like a banana peel stem or anything really. So it seems like the system's been doing a really great job plowing through whatever I've thrown at it. And it's now had to endure a pretty wicked disruption of me plowing through pretty much every square inch of it, every cubic inch of it. So I think this last step is going to have to be me just getting this thing set up again, give it some fresh food, and then we should just clear out of here and let these little guys get back to work. So what I did with the food that I'm putting in here is that I took it out of the freezer a couple hours ago to let it thaw. I always feel like if I'm going to be reusing a lot of materials like what we've collected over here, it's going to be littered with, worms of all sizes, little baby worms tucked away in crevices of things, and just big worms hanging out on things, gobbling the food up. And I just hate the idea of taking a big mound of frozen stuff and combining it with these recycled materials when I try to assemble these layers again. So while I feel like I could shield my worms and my other systems just by using a good amount of bedding, fresh bedding surrounding the frozen foods or whatever, I've got other ways to isolate the worms in those systems from the frozen foods I'm giving them. In a situation like this, where just the nature of the feeding style with all these layers and the attempt to try to reuse old layers, combine it with the new, it just seems a little bit nicer to just get the stuff to be thawed first, and then not worry about having to expose your worms to a whole bunch of frozen materials getting dumped right on top of them. I don't think I showed what I bought down for them. It's nothing out of the ordinary. It's just the veggies that I've been thawing out for a couple hours, a portion of coffee, a chunk of bread in there, some soiled napkins, but nothing out of the ordinary. I guess just that pepper and a couple other things in there, maybe a few pieces of cucumber or whatever. There's a few things in there that never made it into the freezer. So those are just the unfrozen little bits. But typically, 9 times out of 10, you're going to see me putting frozen stuff in as food for my worms. And that thawing process, as the frozen foods start to thaw, they really emit a lot of their moisture. And it just seems to jumpstart the breakdown process. Just as a little loose-fitting sort of foundation for the feeding, I'm going to grab a handful of my pre-made bedding. Nice fresh stuff. Not a lot, though, because I feel like we're already kind of approaching capacity at this bin. You could see how carefully I stacked up all this stuff around the edges, but if I needed to excavate any more than this, I would have been stuck. I wouldn't really have anywhere left to put it. So none of these layers are the types of layers I would expect to come back in a week or so and really see many signs of. A piece of napkin like that seems like it would probably get ripped to shreds by the worms pretty quickly, but who knows. We'll start out by using that as one of our layers, but why don't we do this? We'll also at the same time start commingling some of this old stuff that we located, because we got a good bit of it. We'll use that to fill in any gaps. Make sure it's all getting put to good use. And then in can come some of this yummy food. Let's see, I'm just going to pour stuff out of the bag, and we'll end up with sort of a potluck in each case. Oh, I forgot, this bag has a couple big holes in it. Everything's going to go flying. All right, let me just try to be a little bit more careful. Other than the fact that there's layers and intermediate bits of bedding in between the layers of food, there's really nothing else about this that sets it apart from any other typical feeding in your worm bins. So don't expect anything else in terms of interesting differences. Why did I bring that over? No, I was going to put maybe another piece of napkin down as like sort of the next layer, but I want to toss in a little bit of the grit that I've got for these guys first, and then we can lay down the next lasagna layer. Again, something that it seems like the worms should be able to rip right through pretty quickly, but who knows. As we saw when we got in earlier, that coffee filter didn't even seem to have many holes in it, so the worms didn't even really have the opportunity to dive down into the material when the bright lights appeared overhead. They were kind of stranded on that coffee filter, serving almost as a barrier, preventing them from diving down. So maybe the napkin's different. Maybe it's just a little bit softer material that they can get through a little bit more readily. Now, I've got this fresh coffee filter, so I'm looking over at this old coffee filter that we peeled off earlier. So I'm thinking we're going to put this to good use right down here in the feeding area to start establishing our next bedding layer, lasagna layer. And I thought that over here we had another, here we go, another pretty good size, similar piece of material. I don't think that this is coffee filter, it's something else. I can't tell. It's got some sort of red writing on it. Maybe it was a paper bag? I don't recall. But now we've got a place to put the next portion of food. I think I've got enough coffee to go around here, so I'm going to put a little bit in, but we'll save some for the next layer. Let's combine that coffee with whatever falls out of these two holes on this bag. And keep shaking until we've released about half, and we'll try to save what remains for the last layer. Like, this poor bag, it's falling apart. It didn't leave us with much to build the last layer, but that's fine. I'm not going to worry about it. This is certainly not a precise thing. It's more like a work of art. There's a lot of license you could take doing this for sure. So we're getting there. We're getting there. We're almost done. Bear with me. Alright. So now we've still got a bunch of things here that we can continue to reuse. So why don't we make sure we've depleted all of our recycled materials first before we try to pull in any other whole bits of anything. And I guess when we get down into some of these layers, we're going to find little scraps of this and that. We're certainly not going to find anything that resembles a layer, because we're not even starting with something that resembles a layer. We're just starting with a bunch of bits and pieces of stuff that might have been a layer at one point in the past, but at this point it's just going to end up being really good bedding. And I think we've got it all, more or less. But it's also going to become a nice platform for us to take the last of what we've got over here in terms of food for these little guys. Is the last little bit of coffee in this filter, and then whatever remains of the veggies in this plastic bag. I'm usually feeding frozen stuff, so I'm not used to having all these thawed bits of veggie stuck to the plastic. It's a little bit annoying. I don't know if you ever watched, there's a channel out there called Plant Obsessed, also kind of a worm farming channel, and she'll just take a bag like this that's got food attached to it and leave it in the bin with the worms, and the worms will polish it clean. Then she'll just pull it out, and the worms did all the work of separating the plastic from the food scraps. So I guess I would have the option to do that, but I don't think I'm gonna. I think I'm just gonna do my best to shake off what I can. And man, They don't make bags like they used to, do they? This thing just self-destructed over here. Alright. We're just having a little bit too much fun here. I think it's time to draw an end to this little experiment. Let's continue with reassembling these layers. We'll save this for last, because what we have over here is something that was already kind of in a lower layer. It was covered by the cardboard, I think. Maybe this is what was covering up the layer where all the worms were when we first came in, where all the berries were. So that's pretty cool. I don't think I've got anything else that I can stack in here on top of this. So maybe it's just a matter of putting a couple foodless layers on top anymore, because I've still got this piece of cardboard here, which we can, I guess, at this point sort of backfill a little bit. It's going to be a little bit submerged below the general level of the container, but that's fine. It doesn't have to all level out. I don't want to go covering the whole thing up. It doesn't seem to add any benefit. At least we'll know where the lasagna layer is. All this material on the outskirts of the bin has all just sort of risen up a bit because we fluffed it all up. And I mean, we did in the end add a few morsels of food, a couple chunks of bedding, but I don't think in terms of the overall volume of material in here, I don't think we increased it by much with this particular feeding. It's just the fluffing, I believe, has just sort of, brought the whole contents of this thing up. And, well, we never even tapped into that big stack of cardboard that I've got prepped for shredding. And that's fine. I'm not too worried about that. I am actually considering bringing this whole feeding approach to an end in this bin. I guess it's in that category of, it was fun while it lasted, but, it's just getting a little bit more difficult, I'm running out of space in this thing, and it would just be easier to come in here periodically, open up a hole in the middle of the bin, drop in their food, and be done with it, rather than going through this intricate extra step of trying to assemble something that resembles layers. While it's fun, it is, it's not adding anything to the function of the bin. It's just sort of giving us something to do that's a little bit of a diversion from the typical everyday worm farming stuff. So it's interesting how there's so much room around the edges here. I thought that this plastic covering covered more of the bin, but maybe just the nature of the material is helping it to stay nice and damp at this point without the plastic needing to help so much. Either way, you got to admit the material in this bin is going really nicely. It's humming along good, and there's tons of castings. The worms all look happy and healthy. They're doing a great job on breaking down the materials we've been stacking in here, and I guess we'll just have to see. Next time we come in here, we'll flip a coin or whatever. We'll decide if we want to continue doing the stacked up lasagna style feedings, or if it's time to start just going with vanilla boring typical feedings in here like I do in most of my bins. So that decision will come at a later point. Hopefully you'll be here to join me when it's time to do so. But that's pretty much it for the video. I've got a few things I've got to clean up and put away here, but I'm not going to waste your time with that. That's boring. Before I go, let me just really quickly say thank you. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks for watching.